Great. We want to welcome today. We have from the Inner City Law Center. Vidya is the Director of Pro Bono Services, joined by Jasmine, who's also the Pro Bono Coordinator. They're going to discuss how elimination of bias plays into pro bono advocacy and exactly what kind of work they do, and hopefully how possibly some of our attorneys can help them. And with that, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. My name is Vidya, and I've been at Inner City now for about 11 and a half years in some capacity in the organization. So it's a really great organization, and I'm going to have Jasmine introduce herself, and then we'll dive right in to hopefully some really great and helpful content for all of you that you can use in any pro bono advocacy that you decide to take on.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Smalley. I'm the Pro Bono Coordinator, and I have been with Inner City going on 7 years now. And it's really been a fantastic ride. And thank you all for joining us today and for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our work and the clients that we serve.
Great. And one thing I'll note, if you have questions, do throw them in the chat box. We will try our best to answer them as we go along. But if we notice that you have a question that we're going to address later, then we'll save it for the end, or we'll save it for that portion of the presentation. So this is a presentation focused on client-centered lawyering and how you can apply it in pro bono cases. And I'll start off by saying we present this topic quite a bit to our pro bono partners, our law firm, in-house partners, attorneys, and support staff and paralegals from across the profession. And we do it not because we don't think folks are aware of this information or already apply it in some way, shape, or form in the work that they do. But because one thing we noticed after COVID is that the work that we are doing has become much more complicated. Our clients have many more legal issues. There's often many more challenges in the issues that they're facing and in what we need to be able to do to be good advocates for them. So we want to share that insight with all of you because we are still learning. Even Jasmine and I and our colleagues are constantly getting trainings on how to be really effective advocates, how to address key issues that our clients may be facing that we have no clue about because we've never faced those issues. So we're hopeful this can be helpful for you and you'll find some tips and strategies to really make your pro bono experience. If you haven't already taken on pro bono work, we hope you do in the future, but to make that work really, really, um, uh, a great, great opportunity for you. So what we'll talk about today is we'll do a quick overview of Inner City Law Center and the work that we do. We'll talk about what cultural humility actually means. I feel like it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, and we'll talk about what we mean when we say it and why it's important. How is pro bono different from the work that some of you may be doing in private practice, right? If you're an attorney at a law firm or in-house legal department, or you have your own firm, or you practice something different than public interest law, how is it going to be different for you to work with our clients? How to handle intake sessions, which are just fancy word of saying, client interviews and meetings with clients, and then fundamentals of client-centered lawyering and what that means. A little bit about Inner City Law Center. We've been around 46 years, and we were actually started by a UCLA law alum named Nancy Minty, who started giving advice outside the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen in downtown LA many years ago, and realized that what a lot of her clients actually needed that she was seeing wasn't just a meal, but they actually needed to figure out where to live, how to get back into housing, how to avoid losing their home, how to make their landlords bring buildings up to code so that they had a safe place to live. So she started Inner City Law Center. And today we have a staff of 165. We're growing every year. And we really focus on homelessness prevention work and housing justice work. We do anything and everything we can do to lift a barrier to somebody's income and their housing. So we don't only do landlord tenant cases or housing cases. For example, we help folks get public benefits. We help unhoused veterans access VA benefits or discharge upgrades. We sue slumlords so that, again, people have access to safe housing. We might help somebody with a domestic violence situation and help them get a TRO. But all of our work is meant to focus on clients that are like unstably housed in some way, and they need better and access to safer housing. We also do policy work that's focused on, local and state level policy initiatives, really designed to protect the most vulnerable communities and make sure they have a voice in decisions relating to housing. Why do we do the work that we do? Because of the numbers. Last year alone, and this is according to a homeless count that happens every single year in Los Angeles County, and it happens in other counties too. But our office is focused in LA County. So last year alone, we had more than 72,000 people who experienced homelessness. That means they were either on the street or maybe they were in a shelter, but they were not stably housed. And over 6,000 of those are children. And 18,000 of those are older folks. And a good chunk of those people, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's more than 3,500 are veterans. And that's just unacceptable, right? Under any way you slice it, to have individuals who have fought for this country to be unhoused is just not okay. And to have children living on the streets is not okay. So about 65% of that number are people who are actually unsheltered. And even this is probably an undercount because it's not counting people who are couch surfing for the night or for the week. It doesn't include folks who maybe are somewhere else outside of LA County, but that are homeless and maybe like, come back into LA County a week or two later. Over 78% of that number are people of color, and they are very much disproportionately represented in the homeless population, including individuals who are Black and Latino, because the numbers of unhoused individuals within those groups doesn't correlate to the percentage of members of that community within, LA County at large. Uh, and there's a lot of reasons for these numbers. Some of them date way back to bad policies, to unfair policies. A lot of them are financial, right? Because the cost of rent is moving much faster and growing at a much larger rate than income is for most folks. So most people are not getting 5 to 10% more each year, but the cost of housing is moving at an increasing rate. We're also losing, stocks of affordable housing in the city and in the county every single day. Like every time somebody gets evicted from a rent-controlled unit, or a subsidized unit, that's one less affordable housing unit we have on the market. So I feel like if you've lived in Southern California over the last couple years or the last decade, you've seen this increase, right? It is much more expensive to live here. And many folks cannot afford it. And so our job is to figure out how can we make this a more equitable city so that people who are working multiple jobs, right? People who are working 10, 12, 15 hours a day can at least hope to buy a home one day and live in a safe space. And this, you'll sort of see the numbers going up, right? We started at COVID, and since then, the numbers have sort of remained, at a certain range. They've sort of remained between 70 and 80,000. But you also see the number of sheltered people increase a little bit. And at least in the last few years, the number of unsheltered people has come down a bit. But I will say this doesn't mean we're solving the problem by putting people into temporary shelters. We're doing just that. We're putting them into temporary shelters. We're not giving them any long pathway to owning a home or living in a rental unit that is like a long-term solution. All right, Jasmine.
Okay, thank you, Vidya. And so now we'll move into really what the core concept of this training is, and that is cultural humility. Excuse me. And the definition that we have on this slide is intentionally broad, right? It's the ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other oriented or open to the other in relationship to aspects of cultural identity that are most important to that person. So, what we really want to emphasize here is that cultural humility is not about memorizing facts or particular communities or identities. It's not a checklist. It really is a posture. It's the way that we enter the room when we go in to meet with the client, not only the first time, but every time. It means approaching every client interaction with openness, with curiosity, and with the recognition that the client is the expert in their own life, in their own experiences, and in their values. A lot of times as attorneys, we are trained to be problem solvers. So we like to move directly into issue spotting and we're very solutions oriented. But cultural humility really asks us to slow down and to first understand what is most important to this particular client as an individual. What are the cultural, the personal, and the systematic factors that are shaping how this person sees the issue that they're facing? And that shift is really, really critical in pro bono work. Next slide. So why does this matter? We like to say that cultural humility is essential for the client, it's essential for the case, and it's essential for the advocate's experience, right? So first and foremost, cultural humility, it helps us build trust. Many pro bono clients, particularly clients who have experienced poverty, who have experienced homelessness, immigration related trauma, discrimination, or systems involvement, they may not enter the attorney client relationship with an automatic baseline of trust like you may experience with some of your paying clients. Oftentimes, these clients may be intimidated by lawyers. Oftentimes, they have had prior negative experiences with institutions and systems. So, our first job is really to help put the client at ease, to help make the client feel comfortable. And that directly affects our ability to understand their behavior and to really understand what their goals are. Second, it matters for the case because the better the communication, the stronger the representation, the stronger the attorney-client relationship. It helps us avoid harmful assumptions, and it directly ties into, we think, our ethical obligations under the professional rules, because competent representation really includes understanding the context in which the client is operating and in which the client is making decisions. And lastly, it matters for us as advocates because it improves rapport with our client. It increases effectiveness and it significantly reduces misunderstandings when you can look at your client and their situation holistically and really understand what is influencing their decisions. And so, in many ways, practicing cultural humility just makes us better lawyers. Next slide. So this is really about recalibrating expectations, especially for attorneys who are coming from private practice, right? In private practice, oftentimes, or not oftentimes, all the time, clients are paying for your time, right? There's an expectation of speed, there's an expectation of responsiveness, there's an expectation of efficiency. But in pro bono work, time itself is part of the service. Patience is not just a delay, it's part of building trust, it's part of building rapport with the clients, like we said. So, like the slide says, in pro bono work, patience really builds trust. When we think about representing a pro bono client and how that differs from private representation, we need to recognize that oftentimes many of our pro bono clients are living fundamentally different lives than the private clients that you may be working with. They have different realities. And that's going to affect a lot of different things. It's going to affect their communication styles. It may affect their relationship to the legal system. It very importantly may impact their perception of what's urgent, what's important, what's possible, what their priorities are. So what feels urgent to us as attorneys may not be what's most urgent to the client or what the client is what's most worried about in that moment. So for example, we may be focused on a filing deadline, but the client, especially if you're working with clients at our office, they may be more focused on where they're sleeping that night or whether they have food for their children for the next day. So I like to give an example. We had a client that came in way back when. And he came in for help with a citation. And then he left our office. And when he was leaving our office, he got picked up on a completely different charge and thrown into jail. And the attorney who was working with that client had tried to reach out to that client numerous times to, follow up with him, get some more information, but the attorney wasn't able to reach him. Luckily, that attorney was very skilled in culturally humble representation and made sure to get as much information as he possibly could from the client during that initial meeting. And he was able to move the case forward and get the citation dismissed, even without, having that steady communication with the client. Well, it turns out that, like I said, the client had been thrown into jail. And after he got out of jail, he came into our office and said, like, I got picked up on this separate charge. And I wasn't able to get back in touch with your office. I had to wait it out in jail. But thank you so much for handling that citation for me. Like it really cleared up, something that was a huge hurdle for me. And so I like to tell that story because it just challenges us to challenge our assumptions, right? You might assume that a client just blew off a meeting or they're late for some other reason, but it really could be that this client has this whole other pressing issue that is taking precedence over the legal issue that you're helping with. So really think about that when you're working with pro bono clients. What assumptions from private practice might you unconsciously be bringing into a pro bono representation? And how might that be inaccurate? What are the pro bono clients' lived experiences that are totally different from your private practice clients that may be causing whatever issue or whatever challenge that you're having in the representation? That's something that's worth really reflecting on. Next slide. So here we talk about key mindset shifts. Like, what are some of the private practice assumptions that you have that may come up against the pro bono realities that you encounter? So, for example, in private practice, like I said, we may unconsciously assume that clients have stable housing, they have stable incomes, they have routines. But in pro bono work, many clients may be experiencing housing instability or illness or crises that impact whether or not they're able to show up for appointments. A missed appointment may be a result of a safety concern or transportation barrier. Maybe that client has immigration concerns. And so missing an appointment really is simply a survival need taking precedent over whatever legal issue that you're helping with. Um, Based on your private practice assumptions, you may assume that clients always trust the process. But like I mentioned, many clients may distrust lawyers or distrust the courts or court systems because of prior system harm. And that's a really unique thing that you have to keep in mind when working with pro bono clients, that this distrust is often very rational, even though it may be uncomfortable or may be unfamiliar to you as a attorney. Uh, you may also assume that your client feels very comfortable asserting their needs, right? If somebody's paying for legal representation, normally the clients are very vocal about what they want and what they expect from you as an attorney. But oftentimes that may not be the case in your pro bono representation. Many clients may feel intimidated by someone who's an attorney. They may feel ashamed. They may feel hesitant to disagree because they have never worked with the attorney before. They're not sure, whether or not they're able to push back. So again, you really have to check all of your assumptions about how a client is going to show up in a representation and really recognize that their lived experiences may truly impact how they show up. Um, at the bottom of the screen, we have this myth versus reality, which Vidya kind of touched on. I know often there's a myth that homelessness is about personal responsibility, but as we can see from the numbers about the skyrocketing cost of rent and the racial disparities that exist within the unhoused population. Really, it's about systematic challenges that are really coming together to create really challenging lives for the people that we serve. So, framing things is really essential to culturally humble advocacy when you think about, why a client missed a meeting or why a client finds themselves in the situation that they're in. Um, it's important to be, like I said, culturally humble in the way that you frame things as well. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, so as we can see, many of our clients may often be facing multiple overlapping barriers at the same time. And they're not just legal issues, like these are life issues that really impact every facet of the client's reality. And these issues are also going to impact every facet of your legal representation. So, what does that mean for us, or what does that mean for you as a pro bono advocate? It really means that you need to be flexible. Clients who you represent in pro bono practice may have challenges covering daily expenses. They may be food insecure. They may be facing challenges getting appropriate medical care or essential services. Their work hours may be inflexible, so they may not be able to just take off time to meet with you. They may have challenges finding affordable transportation or navigating building security. So as a result, you will have to change how you show up in that representation. So that might look like offering to meet with the client after hours, offering to meet with the client on the weekends, or offering virtual appointments because, like I said, the client just may not have flexible work hours, or maybe the client is working 2 or 3 jobs and they just can't afford to take off the time from work to show up to a meeting with you. So think about that when you're offering meeting times. For clients who are housing unstable or who are actively unhoused, it may mean offering to meet clients in non-office settings, like meeting them in their encampment or in their shelter or in a public space, a public park, if that's where the client is most comfortable meeting. If you work in an office building where you know that there's going to be a cost for parking and there'll be a huge sign that says like, oh, parking at this building is $40 for the day. Let your client know in advance that that they will see that sign, but you will validate the parking because seeing something like that can be, hugely stressful for our client. Many of our clients don't make that much in a day. So to think that you might have to pay $40 just to park may dissuade a client from showing up to a meeting or may cause a lot of unintended stress for them. So let them know you're going to see the sign, but we'll validate for you. For your clients who maybe don't have transportation or who may have mobility issues, maybe offer to arrange an Uber to your office. Or if the client relies on public transportation and works multiple jobs, maybe just, like I said, arranging transportation to your office may alleviate some of the stress for trying to meet meetings. If you work at a large office building and you know that when you come in, there's going to be building security that asks for an ID, again, let the client know in advance. We at ICLC work with clients who are undocumented, and having to present an ID to a person in a suit may be very scary for people, especially in today's times, especially for our clients who are undocumented. So let your client know in advance that this is, what they're going to experience. Let them know why. Let them know that it's not, has nothing to do with their immigration status. Offer to meet that client downstairs and escort them up to your office. So again, it's really about trying to alleviate fears and to make the client as comfortable as possible. In your pro bono work, you may work with clients who have language barriers. Many of the clients that we work with do not speak English as a first language. Many of the clients that we work with struggle with finding childcare, or like I said, they have immigration are working to clarify their immigration status. Um, and so we always recommend, or we always require, that if you're working with a client who does not speak English as a first language, that you work with qualified legal interpreters who are capable of explaining the legal concepts and in the client's case to them in the language that they understand and that they are most comfortable with. Um, a lot of times our clients are dealing with social stigma or cultural isolation. They may be trapped in unsafe living conditions, but they may not be able to leave due to limited alternatives, right? The stock of affordable housing is constantly decreasing, like Vidya said. Many of our clients are living in situations where they're experiencing exploitation or domestic violence or things of that nature. And so working on their housing case may also require you to work with their caseworkers, work with their healthcare providers and their mental health specialists. Like I said, it will often require you to partner with interpreters or to provide multilingual materials. So if you're working with a client who, again, doesn't speak English, that engagement letter that you provide to them during your initial meeting should be in the language that they speak and that they understand and are most comfortable with. Um, Sometimes you'll be working with clients who have issues accessing technology, who have issues using technology, finding reliable Wi-Fi, or having reliable phone service. And so you may need to figure that out during your initial meeting and then assist the client with finding community centers or libraries that offer free Wi-Fi or that have text access. Um, Figure out alternative means of communication for clients who may not be able to have stable phone access because, they are unhoused and sometimes they lose their phones or their phones get stolen or they don't have the funds to keep their phone on. Just thinking outside of the box and remaining flexible in your representation is essentially what's required when you are working with clients who are vulnerable and have all of the unique challenges that I mentioned. And one thing that I like to emphasize at the bottom of the slide, which comes up a lot, is the lack of English proficiency and just really realizing and remembering that lack of English proficiency does not mean lack of education, lack of credibility, lack of capacity, lack of trustworthiness. It really just means limited English proficiency. And so keep that in mind when you're working with your clients. I think all of the things that we mentioned on this slide are really critical to having pr- carrying forward a culturally humble um, representation. Next slide. So just to recap, cultural humility really starts with awareness. Recognize that legal work is only part of the solution. Sometimes as lawyers, we overestimate what legal intervention alone can do, but oftentimes the clients are facing multiple legal issues at once, and they're also facing multiple life challenges at once. Housing instability, poverty, and inequality are deeply rooted in structural issues like systemic racism, economic disparities, structural discriminations. So we always need to be actively checking our own assumptions. When find yourself asking yourself, like, why didn't the client do something? Why didn't they call me back? Why didn't they follow instructions? Before we fill in those blanks, pause and reflect on that client's lived reality before we make assumptions that can be harmful and inaccurate. We need to think about intersectionality, right? Like race, class, gender, disability, nationality, immigration status. Those things do not exist in a vacuum. They all intersect, and oftentimes, unfortunately, they intersect in ways that make our clients' lives much more difficult than lives that maybe you and I have lived. So keep all of that in mind when you are working on your pro bono cases. Next slide. Okay, so this is a great discussion slide. It's called Spot the Assumptions. And this is a simple statement that you might make when you're working with a client. And at first, it may sound like a neutral question, but within it, there are a lot of assumptions embedded. And the question is, do you have emails showing that? So I want you all to think about like what assumptions is the attorney making just by asking that question. And you can put it in the chat. You can call it out if you want, but just think about like what is the attorney assuming here by phrasing the question in that way. I'll give people a second if they want to put something in the chat before I say what some possible assumptions here might be. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'll tell you what the attorney here might be assuming. Um, the attorney here is assuming that the client has reliable internet access, right? That they have a computer, that they regularly use email, that the client is literate, that written communication is the norm, that they know how to preserve written records, right? For some of our clients, none of those assumptions may be true. Many of our clients are experiencing housing instability, so they experience a lot of device loss or theft. We work with clients who have limited tech access. And for cultural reasons, we work with many clients who rely on verbal communications with their landlords or property managers. So again, a question that simple really does have a lot of assumptions embedded in it. So maybe a more culturally humble approach is not to assume that they have emails or that they should have emails, but to ask an open-ended question like, how did the landlord share that information with you? Or how did you share that information with the landlord? What is your standard method of communicating with the landlord? To see sort of what proof you can build up based on the situation that your client is in.
All right. So we mentioned this phrase earlier, this word, so intake, right? Um, Oftentimes intake is usually the first time you meet with a client, and it is when you do introductions, you actually figure out what their legal issues might be, why they need your help. And so we want to take all the sort of guidance and tips and strategies that Jasmine just shared, and let's apply it, right, to your meetings with the client. How are you going to take all of those ideas of empathy and listening to the client and realizing that the legal work is just a part of it and build a relationship with the client, and how do you do that in your meetings with them? So the goals of your meetings and intake sessions with the client are really, first and foremost, you want to build a relationship with them, right? You want to have them trust you. You want them to understand what it is you're there to do. So start at the very beginning. You want to say, hey, I am your lawyer for this specific issue. Explain what that meeting is for, right? Say the first meeting, we're just going to talk, we'll do some introductions. I just want to get a sense of what you need from us in this maybe immigration case that we're helping you with, or this benefits case. And if you have any documents that you can share that relate to this, bring it. If there's some specific things you want, ask them to bring it. But really tell them what you're going to do during that first meeting. And then once you've sort of made those initial introductions, you also want to explain like what the lawyer-client relationship is. And we do that because some of the clients some of you may be working with are going to be companies. They're going to be in-house legal counsel. And they already know your role. They already know things like attorney-client privilege. They know what confidentiality is. Some of our clients don't know that. They don't know why Inner City Law Center or San Fernando Legal Services or Public Counsel or Betzetic, why any of those organizations shuttle them off to a whole other law firm. So you want to say, hey, look, I'm your pro bono attorney. I am here to help you for free on this legal issue. Things that you and I discuss, are not going to be shared with anyone outside of this room. I may tell a coworker because they're working on the case, but it's not going to be shared with anybody else. These are our privileged communications. Um, you know, you want to go over what confidentiality means, right? If you're drafting documents for them or if they're going to give you things. Um, and then you want to get the client side of the story. You want to figure out what it is they need from you. And you want to figure out sort of an outline as much as possible of what it is they need in the case. There's going to be a couple times when you probably have to keep the client focused because there are instances where our clients may talk about other legal issues. They may talk about other issues in general that they need help with. And I think for a lot of our clients, a meeting with you or another pro bono attorney may be a very rare occurrence in that somebody is willing to listen to them and somebody is willing to help them. And so they may want to talk to you about a lot of different things that have nothing to do with your representation in the case. And it's okay to listen for a while, right? It's okay to let them say the things that they want to say. And then you've got to redirect and sort of get them back. So if a client talks about three different legal issues, you can say, thank you for sharing all that with me. I'm curious about something that you said at the very beginning. You talked about the fact that you got an eviction notice from your landlord. Can we go back to that for a minute? I'm really curious about that. Because that's an issue I'm going to help you with, and I want to talk about like when did they give you that notice? How did you receive it? Right? You can sort of redirect and keep them focused. And you may also want to, if they do have other issues that they need help with, you may at least want to jot down other resources that they need or other issues that they're facing, so you can tell the legal aid organization that you're working with, the folks that gave you the case, and say, hey, I may not be able to help the client with these other things, but these may be things they can benefit from. And one question I want to ask you all just to think about is, when you're thinking about sort of the goals of meeting with the lawyer for the first time, what parts of that might feel intimidating for somebody meeting a lawyer for the first time, right? You have to go into an office and talk to somebody and just think about how that could feel a bit scary, a bit intimidating, maybe a little uncomfortable, right? Again, I think a lot of us are thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go to my lawyer. I'm going to talk about some financial issue that I'm having or a contract issue that I'm having. But think about, clients of ours who faced domestic violence and they have to go into a room with a virtual stranger and talk about a time that they were assaulted. And they have to talk about maybe how they and their kids are going to lose their home, and they have to tell you the details of their health and their families and their job loss. These are intimate things. Most of us don't share these things with our closest friends. And now we have to tell somebody that we're meeting for the first time. So just have that knowledge in the background that your clients are trusting you with an incredible amount of information, and it's personal information. So, what does that mean for you? How do you take that and make it so that this is a comfortable situation for them, that you are somebody that, comes across as somebody that's going to help them and that they can trust? How do you build that rapport? How do you build that trust? How do you build that great relationship? First things first, help them feel safe, right? We have clients, some of our veteran clients, for example, who have had traumatic brain injuries, who cannot be in rooms where there's loud noises outside. So if you're in downtown LA on a ground floor where buses are roaring by, probably not an ideal room for them. Some of these clients also like to sit near like the exit. So if they need a moment, they can just sort of like walk quickly outside, get some privacy, get a moment, and come back in when they're ready to resume. Ensure accessibility, right? A lot of our clients do have physical health issues, and challenges, so they may need a space that's big enough for a wheelchair, or they may need a space, again, that there's Braille. I don't know if many of you use this, but I use this uh, on Zoom, like turn on closed captioning. That could be a very simple thing that your client needs, especially if they have hearing challenges, and you just allow them to actually see what you're saying. And that itself might be enough for some folks. Greet your client and explain everything to them. Encourage them to ask questions, right? I think for a lot of us, when you start throwing around terms like motion for summary judgment and demur, it's very, like, we understand what we're saying, but explain all that to your client because they want to know. It's their case. They want to be a part of it. They want to understand what's happening. They want to know maybe why you're asking for certain information or re-asking, why they have to go to court, why they don't. So involve them in the process and treat them as the experts, right? We have clients who sometimes will say, I don't want to do that. And we'll say, why? It's the best option for you. Like maybe it's settling a case. And to them, they know that maybe settling something for $20,000 seems like a lot, but it is not going to be enough for them and maybe the 4 or 5 family members they're taking care of. And they're not going to find another home that's accessible. Like they know their life, they know what they need. We may not agree. But they are the experts in their cases. So you have to factor that in. Obtain background information, right? Get the information that you need, but also understand the context that your clients live in. Um, and allow clients to share their stories, like we said, get clarification when you need it, redirect, and make sure you get the information that you need, but do it in a way that is empathetic, that is not, very jarring to the client, especially if they're talking about a sensitive issue. I say there's like gentle ways to do all these things. And again, ask about any specific needs they may have, right? So they may need to meet in the evening, or they may need to bring their child into a meeting because they don't have childcare. And maybe it's as simple as having the child in the corner, giving them an iPad and a set of headphones and letting them watch cartoons while you talk to the parent about something, about sort of an intense situation or case. A few other things. Stress the importance of what you're helping the client with, right? You want to clarify exactly what your role is, what your scope of representation is, because clients will think, oh, okay, they're going to help me in my housing issues. Okay, that includes not just my eviction, but maybe also some issue I have with the landlord. Maybe I ask for a reasonable accommodation. Make it very clear what you're helping them with, and stress the importance of staying in touch with you, and tell them what they need to do. Maybe it's they have to check in with you weekly so you can give them updates on the case. Maybe it's that there's 4 or 5 dates where they have to show up to court and to certain meetings. Keep that information available for clients, and discuss, Jasmine already talked about this, but discuss meeting logistics, right? And make sure clients know in advance what to expect. Um, use sometimes it may be you have to use language different than what we currently use or what we have been used to using. So instead of saying a disabled person, it's a person with a disability, right? I think some of our clients don't want their identity to be that it's this disabled person in a wheelchair. That's not the way they want to be thought of, right? Because they might be a father, they might be a college graduate. They might be an electrician. They might be a whole host of other things. Disabled person is not the way that they want folks to think of when they think of them. And Jasmine also mentioned this. So talk to qualified interpreters and use them when necessary. But sometimes you may want to bring in the folks that we call cultural brokers. So for example, you may have a member of your staff who is from a similar or the same community as your client. See if you can bring them onto the case, even if just to help with client meetings. There's a difference between somebody whose only job is to translate and somebody who understands that. And I'll give you an example. We had a client many years ago who was Thai, and we had a Thai interpreter. And the client still seemed quite reluctant to give us information. She just didn't talk a whole lot in meetings. She sort of gave brief, like simple responses to things. And at some point, we reached out to the Thai American Bar Association and we found a pro bono attorney and said, can you just help us with this case, right? Like, become an attorney of record, help us with our client meetings. And that completely changed things around. He was able to explain to us that the reason she wasn't sharing certain pieces of info was because culturally, that was not things you shared with the outside world. It was like airing your dirty laundry with a bunch of strangers about things that happened in your family and that were private, or things that involved your finances. These are not things you just sort of explain. And so he was able to help her understand why she needed to share that with us, because we were her lawyers. We weren't going to share it with other people she knew. We were not going to sort of go around and like parade that information around, that we really just needed to use it for certain motions and briefing that we were going to file on her behalf. And I think the moment she had somebody in the room who felt like a member of her community and a member of her family who understood where her decision making, was coming from, it made a world of difference. Um, we said earlier, let your clients know when and where they need to be, for hearings, depositions, all those things. But if your client doesn't need to be somewhere, don't put them through that. We have this sort of thing where we face really challenging opposing counsel sometimes. We face folks who are really tough on our clients. Recently, we've had opposing counsel who will threaten our clients that if they don't agree to a settlement, they'll call ICE, even though the client has no immigration issues at all. But that still scares our clients, right? And so you don't want to have your clients in certain situations or dealing or facing certain folks if they don't actually need to be there. A couple of we add this for sometimes brand new attorneys because these are like commonly seen issues in our cases. And I will say the majority of the time, our pro bono partnerships, the work that our pro bono partners do and how our clients work with them work really well. Everything for the most part is smooth. Our lawyers and pro bono partners provide tremendous advocacy and the clients really respond to that. Sometimes we have issues and they're and I tell folks you encounter issues in your billable cases too. You just sometimes forgive them because the clients pay you, but you might have clients who give you inconsistent stories. We had a veteran client about 8 years ago, who was giving our pro bono partners a different story every time they met her. And they called me at some point and said, look, I think we have to give this case back because we think the client is lying. Her stories don't add up. Her dates are, always sort of switching back and forth. And I said, she was raped while she was serving in the army. And that is the story where she's being really inconsistent. And that happened 10 years ago. And since then, she's been chronically homeless for almost a decade. So, yes, her story is going to be inconsistent. It doesn't mean she's lying. It just means it's your job as her attorneys to figure out how to write that story. Right? You have to corroborate it with maybe healthcare professionals she saw, or you have to corroborate it with documents that existed, right? When her sort of behavior changed in service, who she was around, right? The people in her unit. You have to build that story because if she was in a position where she could do this herself and could give you, a linear narrative, we wouldn't need you. She could have done this herself. So sometimes clients, their stories, the information they give you isn't coming from any unreliable place. It's because of what they've been through. You might have clients who are late or MIA, and where we suggest, follow up, try to reschedule. If it's becoming an issue where you cannot represent them, then often we send clients a letter saying, look, you have X number of dates to get in touch with us and figure out next steps. If not, we're going to close things for now. We can try to reopen the case, if and when you're ready to come back. Sometimes clients discussing things like trauma, like domestic violence, assault, PTSD, those things may not, and probably shouldn't happen on your first meeting with them. And you probably want to prepare the client and say, hey, next time we meet, I think we're going to need to delve a little bit into the incident that happened with such and such person, back in 2015. And I just want to make sure that there's a comfortable time and place where we can discuss that. I know it's going to be difficult for you, but it is a key part of your case and explaining, this situation to the judge. So let us know what works best for you. There might be unforeseen conflicts between, again, what is in a client's best interest versus what their stated interest or stated priority is. Um, think through additional factors that arise when there's minors, right, who are helping your client. So a client may bring in their child to act as a translator. And so there's always sort of privilege, confidentiality issues, right? When there's a minor, somebody who doesn't understand things like confidentiality. But also that may be somebody your client's really comfortable with. So tread lightly and always ask your legal aid partner for how to handle things like that. You might have clients who are in crisis. They may threaten self-harm to themselves, to others. So, you want to find somebody qualified to help. And one thing to always, always, always rely on, not just resources like suicide hotlines, but always go back to your legal aid organization partner. And I can't stress this enough because if you are seeing something in a client's behavior, they've probably seen it too. And most of the time, for example, our organization, we will tell you that ahead of time. We will say, hey, look, this client may say some things. We've heard them say these things. And this is how we have dealt with it. And so, rely on them and rely on their expertise. You may have multiple adult plaintiffs in a household, and not all of them show up, or there may be issues with a settlement and multiple people having to agree to it. Those are times when it might absolutely make sense to bring in your office's ethics counsel, right? Just to make sure that you're not violating any rules, regulations, that everybody has the input and the voice that they need to have. And then there might be confidentiality issues, and I know in every jurisdiction it's a bit different, but make sure, even small things like you want to call your client, but the best way to reach them is through a family member, right? And you don't want to tell anybody that you're the lawyer. You just want to say, hi, have you talked to this person recently? I'm trying to reach them for something. Can you let them know to call me? Um, because sometimes even the fact that they've hired a lawyer might be something that can put them at risk. So think about confidentialities, issues that arise even in times like that, when they arise when there's multiple parties involved in a case. Um, and sometimes, if you look on the left, we'll say, silence might be your best tool. So sometimes it might be a moment just to listen to the client and see what they need and let the client process what they need to process before you step in. Okay, so we use this slide just to sort of talk about shifts, right? Going back to what Jasmine said at the beginning, but shifts in your mindset, right? So instead of saying, I need you to get to the point, and I don't think any of us would actually say that to a client, right? Paid or not paid, pro bono or not. I don't think we would be that blunt. But instead of sort of even thinking that, we can say, let's take our time. Tell me what happened. You can start at the beginning, and then again, that's your open-ended question, and then after that you can start narrowing it down and like um uh getting your client to the place where they need to get to give you the answers you need. So instead of saying, did you email the landlord? Well, no, why not? Okay, it's fine if you haven't used email before. How do you typically communicate with your landlord? And instead of saying you'll need to figure out transportation, you can say, let's talk through what's realistic for you. What would be a place that's easy for you to get to? And again, this is not meant to say that pro bono should, you know, um, cover taxis for clients or, do any of those things. But it might be that you can meet with them on Zoom instead because they have transportation limitations. Or it might be that there's a middle, sort of a middle place where you can meet with the client. You might be able to use the office of the legal aid organization that sent you the case. So there's a lot that you can do, and a lot of flexibility that folks can have. Okay, Jasmine.
Okay, so now we have a hypo where it's really a chance to put into practice everything that we spoke about here today. So I'll read the hypo, and then I'm hoping that some folks can either put some suggestions in the chat about how they might handle a situation like this, or if folks want to call out. But so we have an undocumented tenant. Who is also an immigrant from the same cultural community as their landlord, and this tenant faces significant habitability issues in their rental unit. The landlord relentlessly harasses the tenant, attempting to coerce them into relocating rather than addressing the necessary repairs. Despite having legal rights, the tenant is reluctant to pursue legal action due to cultural norms and fears of how they might be perceived within the community. How might an attorney effectively advise this client while respecting their cultural values and concerns? So, does anyone have any thoughts or suggestions based on everything that we've discussed here today? I'll give folks a second to sort of think about it and reflect on some of the things that Vidya and I have talked about in the presentation. Keeping an eye on the time. Okay, so it seems like, oh, here we go. Tell the client we need to write a letter to the landlord saying your rights and request. Okay, that's a good start. Anyone else? Well, yeah, I think that definitely telling the client that you could write a landlord to the write a letter to the landlord, sort of stating what your rights and requests are. That's definitely a strong position. Um, I think this hypothetical really is where like cultural humility meets legal counseling, right? Because like the hypo says, like legally there may be some very strong claims, but culturally and socially pursuing those claims may feel risky because the client is fearing social stigma, community backlash, like loss of representation and things of that nature. And at the same time, they have rights that should be respected and protected, and they are facing significant habitability issues, which could be dangerous. Um, one, yeah, I think, it's definitely worth it to write a letter to the landlord, sort of saying what the rights and requests are. Um, but, this situation could be one where like Vidya mentioned, it may be appropriate to bring in sort of a cultural broker, right? Where someone who is an attorney, who's also a part of the culture, who's very familiar with the culture, who could really understand how to appropriately navigate what the cultural backlash might be or what the cultural values are, while also respecting and protecting the client's rights. So, our role is not to tell the client what they should value here, but to respect what the client does value, what their concerns are, and then to explain sort of what all the legal options are while respecting what the client has, presented as being the most important outcome to them. So that might sound like, you absolutely have legal rights here. Let's walk through what each option might look like and how it might affect you practically within your community. Right.
And
So
and
again,
and one more thing just to note, and it might be that this is a situation where you just have to wait till the client is ready to move forward. Because they may say, hey, look, the person who is my landlord also, I don't know, is part of my church or is part of our temple, and they know a lot about us, or they're really tied to big parts of my family. And I don't want to get into a legal issue with them. So this may be something where, again, their priority is something different, and you and I may absolutely not agree, but it is their choice and it is their decision. So you may actually have to step back and say, okay, when you're ready to move forward, or if you want to move forward, you can let me know.
yeah, exactly. And I think, when and if the client reaches back out and says, hey, this is something that I would like to move forward on, at that point, it's really incumbent upon us to, again, walk the client through what their options are, what their legal options are, and also how that might impact them within their community, since the client has, said that that is of paramount importance to them. But again, this is where cultural humility really comes into real lawyering. We're not just giving legal advice, we're really counseling the whole person and taking their entire situation into consideration. Next slide. Okay, so now we just have time for some questions. It seems like we'll end right on time. Does anyone have any questions about what we shared here today?
I did get a question, a private question sent to me, which I'll answer out loud just so anyone else has it. They had asked if Inner City Law Center or any of our work happens outside of Los Angeles, and it does not, just because a lot of our funding is limited to LA County and LA City. So the County of LA is sort of like our geographic boundary of the work that we do. And so all of our clients sort of have to be within those zip codes. Yeah. But there are similar organizations doing this in all of the counties of Southern California. So I encourage you to look up other places that will do similar work.
Thank you both so much. I do have a question. This is Linda. Because we have many seasoned attorneys on the Zoom today. What kind of time commitment are we looking at if someone was to volunteer with your organization?
Yeah. So Linda, it depends, and we can find something that works for you is the short answer. So we provided our contact info up there, and Linda, I'll I think you're going to send this handout to everybody.
Yes.
So we have weekly clinics, biweekly housing clinics that happen in LA where you can come in just for 3 hours and provide some guidance to folks facing evictions. We'll train you. Or if you want to get your hands a little dirty with a case and sort of dig in with litigation, we have like, limited civil cases, our eviction cases, where you're probably going to work on it for a month to 3 months and maybe spend 30, 40 hours on it in that time. But again, you're gonna actively work to keep somebody in their home. And then we have longer term sort of, bigger projects that your firm might need to sign on to or your in-house legal department that are bigger projects. But if you want to do a research project, we'll have a research project. So we need help on a lot of different things. So whatever you can do, we'll find something for you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your expertise. This was so valuable. You do such important work, and certainly we could have our attorneys reach out to you. Thank you all again. MCLE will be going out later today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.